These are Crocs.
Yeah.
Yep, they're flames.
Isn't Crocs going out of business?
Oh yeah, they are. Hardcore.
Well, they closed all of their manufacturing plants down and the majority of their distribution stores.
Okay. But
They're still trying.
Weeze Logistics is still going for it.
I just have 2 pairs right now. I have a red pair and then I got these for my birthday.
I like the dude. He's got an 80 plate. Those are fish, right? It's good.
I was in our driveway, so I there's no time to go all the way to the cops. Trying to get it to turn, like trying to turn in radius and stuff.
We're just gonna, I wanna talk to Sam for just a minute. Not Sam, the other Sam.
What do you need?
Sam, can you come with me?
Yeah. Should.
That is so cute. Oh my god, that is so cute.
Close my eyes when I play, so nobody's really
We got a new electric scooter.
something I need to work on.
Electric
Because
commuter
like
scooter.
taking me and put me at a gig. I'm like,
We brought it over to the house and we were like taking it down the driveway that day. That's not
yeah.
like almost
Then
20.
nobody. Like, playing for yourself.
I think so. Like it's got videos. Or like you take a bike lane.
You can call him Dip Boy though. Dip Boy. DIP. He's a big dip.
So we got 2 things and then relaxing weekends.
We were supposed to bring Taylor's brother and we were on schedule to come to dinner. So we were up there and she dropped off again. But the kids were still up there.
So, okay, do you need that rearranged?
Oh, nice. Tired.
If you want, I can do that.
I got it. So what do you
Since
want
our
for that?
service.
You want to
She's
tear
all
down?
on 27.
Oh, yeah, you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
You know what you're seeing. I'm going over here.
Is that
That?
by Friday?
Sorry.
No worries.
Made it.
That road doesn't get too like this.
What's your process? If somebody opens the door wide,
Hey Scott and Cam, this is my family.
Oh, there you are. Good morning, guys. Nice to meet you.
Carl.
Josh, Max, Carl.
Ah.
Nice to meet you guys.
I had a box fish. You ever seen a box fish? They cut a box. They cut it 90 degrees. And they don't look like they should put.
See my phone? Can you see my phone?
Boston's winning. Gone for it. Boston's winning 2-0.
Watch out for it.
I'm scared.
You can do it.
I'm not gonna do that.
Still really hard.
Let's do it.
Like, I would probably hit him in the back of the head.
It's fine. Lawsuits.
Cover up a little more of those pasty white thighs.
It's winter, man. Don't worry about it. I usually play percussion, but I am today.
Hand this back.
Yeah, throw it. You want to throw it this time?
Yeah, just throw it as hard as you can.
Against the wall.
Max
Break
got a
shade
gold
back
medal.
to the. Malia or Malia?
Malia.
Malia, okay. I heard both ways, so. Malia doesn't make sense.
She hates it when you call her Melanie.
It's probably true.
I
It's going really well until I said that.
know, and now I'm kind of
You should probably leave, Scott.
I'll take it. It was good. How about you guys?
Good. Good. That's fun. Did like a little bit of birthday thing.
Was it your birthday?
Little Dave and Buster's.
Ushers and then little
It was his
barbarian.
birthday.
Yeah.
Oh, it was your
Yeah.
happy birthday.
Thank you. It's Wednesday, but yeah, it's coming up. Yeah.
It's riding that scooter.
Wait it out as long as you can.
Oh yeah, that scooter was expensive. That's true.
He got an electric scooter. He just zips that around Boise now.
But the kind that like older people have, the electric ones, where you sit back. No, it's
Go.
no, it's
Like the
It's a
ones I
rascal.
yeah, just the ones are okay to do at the store.
It's a little bit souped up, dude. A lot nicer.
Danny put a
Thank you.
V6 in it. Petrol tool. Well,
I know.
it's there.
Getting close.
No, I'm just glad my head's not like blocking Danny's like
Oh, yeah, it is.
half his
Don't
body.
worry.
Is it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
don't worry.
Blocking me for sure.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to see me, Scott.
I used to play violin, so I'm focusing on that.
Yeah.
Perfect. Oh, that's
watched that yesterday,
Yeah.
by the way.
Oh, did you?
You have that.
We went to Dave and Buster's and did the ride, so we're just like.
Oh, was it? It was a Jurassic Park
I
ride.
think it made me sick a little bit.
Did it? You didn't look like you were enjoying yourself.
I apologize, but it was, yeah.
Buy your ticket for the ride, and you didn't enjoy it, did you?
Well, I tried, but
I appreciate you lying. Though.
it was your birthday.
It's true.
Flaming Crocs, yeah.
Alright,
It's like, I
wanna be
move
sponsored
quick.
by Crocs.
That's actually a thing that we do on Instagram. Is @Crocs, #sponsor me.
I saw that.
Trying really hard.
Yeah, you saw it.
One of these
Cam's
days.
that's all he's got. That's all the hashtag.
The only, yeah, those are the only shoes I wear.
Cool. Welcome to Couch Surfer, everybody. I'm Wayne, program director. Taking time out of a beautiful Sunday, although it'll be dark. You wouldn't have anything else to do. It's dark anyway. Just a couple reminders, and we'll take an intermission after about an hour. The bathrooms are down the end of this hallway on the left. There's drinks and snacks in there, obviously, and the opportunity to buy a raffle ticket for Radio Boise's electric car. We're raffling it off on December 7th, which is the night of our practice New Year's Eve party, which is just a hootenanny for the ages. This year it's going to be at the Linen Building, and then we actually have a band of Radio Boise DJs who are also musicians, including our engineer in there, Speedy Gray. Kudos to him for putting this sound up. They're going to play the Velvet Underground album Loaded.
Wow.
Front to back, which is about as pop friendly as the Velvet Underground guy. It'll be short on sadomasochism references. So that's going on, and then this Wednesday our radiothon starts, our fall fund drive. So we'd love to hear from you, even if you want to just hang out. Man, we have so much food here, we can rarely keep up with it. So feel free to drop in. That starts Wednesday at 6 a.m. and it'll go on for 9 days through Friday the 26th. It ends at 8 p.m. So you're going to hear all kinds of special programming and a lot of DJs riffing on stuff and just being generally goofy. It's a big goofy fun time for us. So anyway, thanks to all you guys for coming in for Couch Surfer. Christian Winn, who's going to be tonight's moderator. Fresh off successful campfire stories last Monday.
Yeah.
And this is our second year of this, and this is our second of the season, so I'll let Christian talk about the rest of it. Take it away.
Phones, yes.
Oh,
Speedy
yes.
comes in with the
Speedy reminds,
silence
just
the
make sure
phones
your
and turn 'em
ringers
off.
are off
Yeah.
on your phones if you don't mind. Appreciate it. Christian Winn.
Right. Thanks, Wayne, and the station. But yeah, so this is our second year of doing the couch surfer stories here, and it's a concept we started at the St. Lawrence Gridiron. We did 2 years or 3 years ago there, and then moved it over here to Radio Boise after taking a year off. And so some of you guys know that, you've been here before, but it's just basically a moderated conversation and performance event, but it's kind of like Fresh Air meets NPR's Tiny Desk Conference, and so we're happy to have these wonderful artists here. And so the trees, who are, I'll get into their origin story, their Craigslist origin story here in a second, but they're here along with Malia Collins, who's a good friend and someone who I've read her writing for years and worked with on many levels we'll get into. And what we like to do to begin with usually is start out with a couple songs from you guys. And so the trees, we have Cameron, we have Scott, and we have Hardcore Danny. I've been told to call him Hardcore Danny on the fiddle.
Legal first name.
There we go. And well, tell us a little tiny bit about yourselves personally as musicians, and then hop into the song.
Yeah. So pretty much, guitar, harmonies, writes, and like to have a good time with these guys. So that's
We met up, was it 5 years, 6 years ago?
Yeah, we met up 5 or 6 years ago.
At a Hobbit party, actually.
Yeah, it was a Hobbit party.
Were you dressed as hobbits?
Yeah, no, we were dressed as, yeah, we were.
I was airborne, but
Yeah, it's true. You were. Yeah, it was insane. It was huge. It was about 10, 12, 20, maybe. It was like 20, like just a row of just this giant table of food.
Mm-hmm.
It was insane. Yeah, he rides violin, and
I had a guitar somehow, and
You were
I was
hobbits
like,
and you were like ready to go.
right, let's
Let's
play something.
Let's
Yeah,
jam.
that sounded
Okay.
like it's a Hobbit sound. So
Alright.
And then I just met him a little over last year.
just
Craigslist ad responding.
Right,
I want to play music with somebody, and
Yeah.
after 30 people that I wish I didn't invite to my house,
I wanted to see Danny.
So I know you guys have an EP out, and then you have a new album you put together. What's the song from? Which one?
this first one is off the EP, and it'll also be on the album too. But this song's actually the first one that we wrote, that we like came together and actually played, and we probably played this song, I don't know,
Couple
I don't know how
Two or
many
three.
a couple times. Yeah.
lots of zeros after.
Alright, let's hear it.
So it's called Elijah.
Oh, Elijah, won't you carry me home to the gates of heaven or the gates of hell? 'Cause that's where I'm gonna go alone if I don't change my ways. So Lord, have mercy on another wayward soul, another wayward soul, another wayward soul. My baby, she tells me where the dark days I know, but they better repeat themselves, and we don't. Well, I'm already gone, and I said that I don't. I wanna go back home to the place upon the hill. Please take me home. My baby, she dreams about a place far across the sky. Wish I could take you there, take where my, oh my, and I know, baby, wanna go back home to the place upon the hill. Please take me home. Oh, Elijah, won't you carry me home to the gates of heaven or the gates of hell? 'Cause that's where I'm gonna go alone if I don't change my ways. So Lord, have mercy on another wayward soul, another wayward soul, another wayward soul.
Nice. Who's Elijah? Is it based on an amalgam of characters? Or is it like
Kind
a
of,
fictional
it's-
character? Or do you
It's like a
know?
fictional character. It's just, I guess, the name that I liked at the time to kind of, when you want. It was written when I was really far away from home, and the song's about being homesick and how you just want somebody like out of nowhere to kind of take you back. And sad about being away from home.
Obviously has some melancholy elements to it for sure, but I'd like you guys to play one more to kick us off here.
Yeah,
and then
sure.
Get into conversation about your stuff.
We want to hear
About
melancholy. This
Okay,
one's
bring it down.
just.
I
This
like
next one. This one's called Town with Another Name.
It's my favorite.
God, we're play right then.
Well, it didn't take long for that gold to turn to dust. Casting all these stones like a king of Midas touch. That's alright. I go feeling just to say, hey, I'll keep riding in a town with another name. Silver in that suit, in a bag of broken dreams. Searching all around for these diabolic scenes. That's alright. I go feeling just to say, hey, I'll keep riding in a town with another name. Woo! Pressed against my luck, and the well that has run dry, and the well has turned to dust like the gold that stole my pride. That's alright. No feeling just to say, hey, I'll keep riding in a town with another name. I'll keep riding in a town with another name.
You asked for melancholy.
No, that's good. That was a little upbeat, I'd say. The fiddle, lifts it up a little. Malia, you says your favorite. Why is that your favorite?
I have so when I was thinking about doing this today, I thought, what's the greatest band interview of all time? And I thought it was when Terry Gross interviewed Leonard Cohen.
Oh,
I
wow,
don't know
that's
if anybody
fantastic.
heard of that.
Yeah.
And so I was looking over her questions today, and I was thinking about, and I was listening to your music as I was doing it, and I said, I love your song Town with Another Name, and I'm curious how that song, the chords, the lyrics, and the harmonizing came to life.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was in another band before this, and we played Tree Forts. We went on tour for a little
We
bit.
try not to talk about that.
We don't talk about it that one. But yeah, so I wrote. I had a guy named Steve in the band, and at that certain point, he's great now. But at a certain point, he was kind of spiraling down a little bit. It seemed like with just certain things that was going on in his life personally. And so it was just about him and what if he would have kept going down that route. So he would have had to keep going to another place, get another identity, that kind of situation. So that's what it's about. But the harmonies kind of, I don't know, they kind of came together on that one. Cam's been killing it with the lower parts, and I kind of been just doing the higher parts. That's kind of one of our earlier songs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
that was one of the first. So we got 5 songs together, and we just ran through those all the time so we could open for bands, and that was one of the first 5. And a lot of the songs like that one, whoever's writing, because I write and Scott writes, and whoever writes usually has the chord progression and then the lyrics down, and then we come together as a band, and then we kind of figure out where each other instrument fits in.
Yeah, and that last part, Danny really came in too.
Oh, yeah.
He was just talking about, it's like, what if you do that little last part and I come in and do that same thing with you? That. And so, and I was like, yeah, that sounds great. So that's kind of how that's the whole structure of it, pretty much. Yeah.
Nice. I'm curious then, are you both lyricists and song? I mean, like, and write music, so you kind of collaborate that way. How does that process kind of usually work?
We usually
face to face or do it outside.
What's interesting is whenever like I bring a new song to the table at a jam, Scott also usually has a new song. So it seems like the time that we're writing tends to really line up, which is I think interesting, because every time Scott comes to a practice, like, I've got a song, it's like, oh, I've been like working on one too.
Yeah,
and then
it's like a 1-to-7 ratio. Cam's got 7 songs, I need to have 1 usually. And I was like,
yeah, but 6 of mine get axed.
Yeah. You guys have 2 more members of your band too.
yeah.
We do. Our drummer's actually sitting right back there, Clinton.
Clinton, and then there's was it Zach?
Zach.
Yeah.
Zach
Zach de la Fuente.
plays keys
Yeah.
for a band.
So do you guys chime in on, like, you give like some feedback when you're like not writing the songs necessarily, but are you like, this one gets asked? Sorry.
I think, especially with Scott and Cam being like really the ones that are the lyricists and so creative, like, I feel like I'm always like, they're like, are you sure this is good? I'm like, no, man, it's good. So a lot of the time it's that part of thing, just getting in there. But yeah, I think it's mostly just kind of, for me at least, kind of feeling out where I fit in as far as the chords and all that kind of stuff goes.
Yeah.
Finding the space
Mm-hmm.
in the songs.
That's
Nice.
true. He makes something happen. Danny always makes something happen.
Yeah.
If not there, he just stands there. He looks great.
He's
Like, that's perfect. Man.
He's a large hobbit though. He's very
Yeah.
But I'm curious, maybe just before we switch over to Malia and have her read from her awesome essay, just I guess that origin story of like for you guys, you mentioned that the Lumineers sort of started that way, like the Craigslist ad, and did you take the ad out? And then you said you had some bad experiences a little.
So I had an ad out at the same time that Scott had an ad out, and so people were answering mine, and I was like answering other people's, and then it just eventually lined up.
Misconnection, you guys like never like somehow.
Yeah,
You
and
guys
we
connected.
Misconnections on Craigslist.
Yeah.
You like cross paths.
Um,
But how'd that go? Yeah, you said you didn't go through too many people once you kind of got you two together.
Yeah, and once we got together, I think Scott came over to my old apartment, and I had our like spare bedroom set up with a couple mics, and then we just plugged in and jammed out some songs, a couple of which turned into songs we play now.
Yeah, that's true.
Was that sort of a huge relief, like,
Yeah,
I
to
can,
have somebody
like,
normal
connection.
that
I'm just taking my time.
and then when I can't get out of it, when I can't say, oh, I'm done with this.
Yeah, that's
Too deep.
true.
And then eventually Scott was like, oh, well, I know this fiddle player that's really good. And I was like, perfect. And then we went down to the Hive, and Danny was there, and we played, and then got some beers.
Is this the
and
fiddle player?
everybody,
Yeah, you're right.
everybody was feeling good. And then where we started jamming at his house, we had, that's where Zach just spent a lot of time. And we were like, why don't you jump in on the piano? And
Yeah,
Kind of the
the
rest
guy
is-
that like doesn't play keys at all, like plays keys now,
yeah.
and he's really good at it. It's just he got his degrees in there and like music, and it's just he's a great asset to have, honestly. Great guy.
Nice. You had mentioned kind of an outlier that didn't work out too well. He
Oh,
spoke
yeah.
like about a dozen words over the course of weeks. He
Oh,
said, like when he
that
came
was-
in.
Was that cellist?
Scott number 2.
Oh, that was Scott. Yeah, Scott number 2.
Yeah, Dave named it first set, but yeah. So
Scott.
the cellist number 2 was not
Which
the best.
it was actually kind of funny because the picture that Radio Boise chose to like do this on Instagram and stuff has our other Scott was a mandolin
Right,
player, and he's actually in that photo from the one gig that he came
It's
to
a good
with us.
photo.
Yeah.
So-
And I think that photo's from our very first
It's our first show.
Yeah.
Hop Penny.
That was a company. Yeah, that's right.
I'm curious when you say, from your first show, so thinking about being a writer, they always tell writers when they're writing to imagine that who the audience is that they're writing for. Do you folks imagine an audience when you're writing songs, or is each song different?
When I write a song, I don't really think about the audience. I just write what I'm feeling, and if people don't like it, they don't. Like my band, if they don't like it, it'll get cut, but I just write what I like. I write what I like to listen to and what I like to play, so.
Yeah, for me, I think for me writing though, it's like it depends. You know, if I feel like this is a song, so I'll play like if I'm feeling good and I'm in a good mood and I want to write about something good, I'll think about how the audience might perceive this, and because I know it might kind of be up that alleyway of it, and so maybe I will contour a little bit. You know, I'm not gonna play something like, you know, just terrifying. You know, it's like, oh, the audience is gonna hate that, and you come to an acoustic group set and just talking about
Some speed metal.
yeah, right. So, but yeah, a little bit. I agree. It does come to that. So
Yeah. Well, back to you. And how do you go through that as a writer? You're writing right now, to kind of segue about Hawaii, what you write about, where you grew up. I will list a little bit of your far-flung travels and sort of accomplishments, but yeah, Hawaii to Wisconsin to Beloit College, where you studied journalism and creative writing. Then you got a master's in literature from the University of Hawaii, and then you went over to France and you studied French literature, and then you came back to Boise. Well, you came to Boise and you ended up staying here to go, and you ended up in school at the MFA program. Here is where I met you.
Yeah.
But I mean, as a writer, do you write right now? You're writing about you write about Hawaii a lot, but what do you make it your Hawaii, or do you have an audience in mind with that?
You know, that's a good question. So I didn't really consider audience until Josh asked me, when you're writing, do you have an audience? And I thought maybe if I had somebody in mind, that would
That's
help
Josh
me.
right there.
Yeah,
The
that's
husband.
Josh up front. It would be helpful, and I think when I write, I imagine, I try and write things that I would want to read, I guess is the easiest way to put it. And so I think about the women writers that I admire very much, and sometimes I imagine them not too much, because then I don't want to write. But I imagine when I think of an image or a line, I think, you know, would this do like Susanna Moore proud, or what would Lydia Yuknovich think of this? And sometimes that helps me be a little more honest with my writing. And then sometimes I don't think about that because I don't want to not write.
Well, why don't you introduce like this piece you're going to read
Yeah.
the first half of right now,
Yes.
or so, and then speak to maybe whatever you want, I guess, about it actually.
Sure. So, hi everybody. Thank you so much for coming.
Yes.
It's nice to see you all here. And I'm reading a piece. So I wrote this last year for Scary Fort.
Which is coming up on the 27th.
Yeah.
You'll be back.
If
by
you
the way.
haven't
We'll
had
talk
enough
about
of me by the end of tonight, I'll also be reading at Scary Fort in 2 weeks. And so I wrote it for Scary Fort, and then I just sort of wrote it for that, and someone she said, you should send that out, and I thought maybe I should, and so I sent it out, and it was published in August by the Hawaii Pacific Review, and it's a story. It's called Waimanu, and it's a piece that I wrote thinking about what it's like growing up in Hawaii with my mom's really superstitious, and navigating superstition and fear, and then having my own kids, and my son Max is also here, and he hates scary things. So I didn't tell him that I was reading something scary until he was in and he was committed.
And this is nonfiction.
And it's nonfiction. And Chris described it the other way as, well, there's some crazy shit that happens, and I think that's the best way to describe it. It's a story that kind of starts off with this superstitious mother and what it's like from a very young age being afraid of everything, and then the natural world. My high school, where I was in drama and in The Hobbit, Where I was
Full circle.
I know, I keep saying the reasons that we were destined to meet. And then it goes through and it culminates with this hike that Josh and I took, not this summer, but the summer before, back into a valley called Waimanu, which is on Hawaii Island, which has been in the news a lot recently because Kilauea volcano is erupting. And it's that island where the volcano was erupting, and I was trying to tie these things that I love together and also navigate what it's like to be from a place that I'm also very far away from now, and how I carry those beliefs with me wherever I am, regardless if I'm in Hawaii or if I'm in Idaho. And so I'm going to read the first half and then finish up after our break. And it's called Waimanu. I grew up in Hawaii, and before I learned to read, I was made to memorize the list of superstitions my mother kept posted on the side of the fridge. Superstitions we'd repeat back to her like a mantra whenever we broke one. No whistling at night. Don't sleep with your feet towards the window or the doorway. Don't look outside once it's dark. Don't cut your nails at night. Never step over a body on the floor. Don't sweep trash outside the door. Don't cut your hair, and if you do cut your hair, save it. I grew up afraid of being taken away by spirits, of getting eaten while swimming at the beach or in a waterfall and then turning into a spirit myself. A woman with no face, like the one who haunted the Waialae Drive-In, or the woman who appeared in reflection at the wading pool at Manoa Falls, who lured young men in for a kiss and then drowned them. At night, I slept with the light on and fell asleep praying that nothing would come in to steal my breath. Two things I remember most from high school: ghosts and wild boars. At drama camp every year, we spent the weekend in the upper campus dorm, the one with its insane asylum green walls and the kitchen light that flickered on and off and buzzed like a mosquito punk. The students who boarded on campus said it was the most haunted dorm, home to the ghost of the high school senior who was found hanging in the forest behind the school. In that spot, it was rumored, where on nights with no moon they could hear him, calling out to his girlfriend, his lonely cries echoing off the dormitory walls. There was the girls' bathroom where I once saw the ghost of a young woman hanging from the rafters, or the heaviness I felt sitting on my chest when I went to the nurse's office, which had doubled during World War II as a dispensary for gravely wounded soldiers. The students who lived on campus told stories of a woman who floated down the hallway and smelled of yellow ginger. They told stories of the night marchers, spirits of the ancient Hawaiian ali'i, who marched in procession over the same worn paths they fought when they were alive. You know they're coming, they said, when you hear the drums and the conch shell blowing. My Auntie Betty, whose house butted up against the Nu'uanu Pali, said the night marcher's path led through her house, past the baby's room, out to the yard and into Nu'uanu stream. When the baby was little, she said, the first night marcher in the procession lifted him up and set him off to the side, and the last one in the procession set him back in his crib. What happens when you hear them, I asked. Babe, she told me, you throw yourself on the floor, you don't look up, you wait and pray. They see you looking, and you're the next one dead. On November 17th, 1982, 2 days before Hurricane Eva struck the island of Oahu, a pack of wild boars thundered through the hallways of the school and ate everything in their path: backpacks, shoes, even metal chairs. The pigs were huge, the size of boulders, their tusks sharp and covered with dirt and shit and blood. The sounds their hooves made against the concrete was like something otherworldly, and I could feel in my chest the reverberation of their giant bodies pinballing against the walls. When the flash floods hit, and the wild boars were washed down the mountainside, into the backyards of the houses dotting the valley floor. The whole place reeked of rot and dead pig flesh, and we rode the school bus with our hands pressed over our mouths and noses to keep the stink out. On the nights of the Kona winds, when the air doesn't move and hangs thick over the mountains, people who live in the valley say they can still hear them, and when they look outside to see what's rustling in the yard, nothing's there, but they can smell their heat and their blood and hear the faint rumble of hooves like angry knocks on the door. Max, I'm so sorry for the next session. The house we live in now is haunted. When we bought it, the old couple living there, who were both blind, said it was too hard for them to get up and down the narrow staircase. It was a good house, they said, a good place to raise kids. They had raised 5 children in the house, and we found out years later that their oldest son, Randy, died in the house shortly before we moved in. He slept in a small room off the back, the best room in the whole place, cozy with white walls and a huge picture window that looked out over the backyard. He built and painted the room himself, and when he was diagnosed with cancer, he moved back in with his parents to wait out his days in his old bedroom. For the first couple of years we lived there, I couldn't stay in the house alone. There were nights when I woke up and smelled cigarettes and sweet old lady perfume. One night I was downstairs in the laundry room and saw the shadow of a man pass by, first slowly, then quickly, and run behind the door that led down to the crawl space. When we knocked down the walls upstairs to make a bigger room, it only got worse. At night, I'd wake and stare at the ceiling, the rafters shadowed like the hull of a ship, and hear footsteps in the part of the room that used to be Randy's. Once I heard what sounded like a big metal pot being dropped on the kitchen floor, but when I went down to check, nothing was there. When my son Max was 2, and we were upstairs in the room playing, he said to me, "Mama, who's the man standing behind you?" There were nights I woke and Max was standing next to the bed, staring at me. One night I saw the same dark shape crawling across the floor in the direction of the kids' bedroom. They moved their little mattresses into our room after that, and we slept, all 4 of us, doors locked, sweating. We left town that summer to spend a week in Maine and had friends come over to house sit. When we got back, we invited them for dinner, but they wouldn't come. For weeks we invited, and they always said no. Months passed, and I forgot about it. A year later, I ran into one of our house sitters, and he finally offered to talk to me. Not at the house, he said, but at a coffee shop downtown. He said it didn't start the first night or the second, but it was the 3rd night they were there when it happened. He said his girlfriend bolted out of bed and started screaming. When he snapped on the light and looked at her, her eyes were wide open, but it was like she wasn't there. She was focused on something in the corner of the room. He tried to calm her down, but she pushed him away, panting. And then, he said, she looked at me, and it was her face and her eyes, but her eyes looked scary, and she said, "Close the door now. The little people are outside." He jumped out of bed, grabbed her and the dogs, and said, "We're leaving." She said, "We can't leave." So he left all by himself, and then, this is the one thing I'll never forget. They broke up like 2 weeks later. This is the one thing I'll never forget, he said, as I was backing out of the driveway. I looked up at the window facing the street, the kids' bedroom, and I saw her standing at the window, silhouetted against the dark and the shadow of something else walking up behind her. "I'll never step into that house again," he said, and he hasn't. In the summer of 2017, my husband Josh and I hiked the 10 miles from Waipio Valley on the Big Island back to Waimanu Valley. They call Waipio Valley the Valley of the Kings, and the whole place is said to be haunted by the spirits of ancient Hawaiian ali'i. Along the beach on the way to the trailhead, we passed a number of sand mounds marked with crosses and signs reading, "Kapu, keep out, Hawaiian graves." It is in this valley where Kamehameha I, the first king of a conquered Hawaii, was hidden after he was born, and where some say his bones are still buried. Since the Hawaiians believe a person's spiritual power, or mana, is manifested in their bones, the bones of the ruling class were wrapped in kapa cloth and secreted out at night and hidden in sea caves, cliffs, and behind waterfalls. One story goes that Kamehameha's bones were hidden in one of the caves deep in Waimanu Valley. When I told my mother it was into this valley we were hiking, she said, "You know what's back there, right? You know what you could find. Don't make trouble. Don't go any place you're not supposed to go." We went. The only way to Waimanu Valley is to hike in, and the hike is hard. At the trailhead is an old wooden sign that reads, "Don't fall off cliff, caution menehune, no stair, dead-end trail, wild pigs, next 8 miles, plenty sharks, strong current, they're watching, good luck." When the tsunami struck Waimanu Valley in 1946, the 40 or so people who still lived there escaped up the cliffs. We just hiked down, and the valley has been uninhabited for more than half a century. The first mile is vertical, along the Muliwai Trail. The switchbacks a strung out Z across the cliff face, the same trail the ancient Hawaiians hiked to get from one valley to the next. Halfway up, we passed a local family with 6 kids in tow, coolers strapped on their backs, fishing spears and nets slung over their shoulders. I thought, if they can get up this, I can get up this. I stopped every 5 minutes. I dropped my backpack. I told Josh, "Leave me here to die." When we finally made it to the top and sat under a thicket of ironwood trees, I started to think my mother was right, that we shouldn't have come. I wondered if this was a way for the valley to tell us to keep out. The hike traverses 8 miles of valleys and gorges, and there are 13 stream crossings. There are no ocean views during the hike, just thick forest and albizia trees wide enough to carve tunnels through. The day was gray and overcast, and in the thickest section of jungle, it felt like nighttime. At the third valley inn, a dead boar lay in the puddle next to the stream, and I hiked, gagging, for almost 10 minutes. We saw a few people on the trail, and with the gray sky and clouds threatening, I knew we wouldn't see many more. The closer we got to Waimanu, the heavier the air felt, and just past the 6th gulch, when I called Josh's name and another voice answered, a voice that came from the trees and not the direction where Josh was headed, I felt it behind me, the space filled with something I couldn't see but could feel. Once we got down into the valley, I could feel it even stronger. About 5 miles in, with another 5 miles to go, a man stopped us. "Turn back," he said, "or camp at the next shelter. You're not going to make it. It's going to be dark and you'll get stuck on the trail. You do not want to be on this trail once the sun's down. Trust me, you don't want to be on this trail in the dark." Fuck him, I thought. I found a deep reserve of strength I didn't know I had, and we hustled through the rest of the hike. We made it to camp by 6, with enough light to set up. Our campsite was next to the beach, along a jetty of black rocks, some stacked 10 or 12 feet high. The water was too rough to swim in, and murky too, and it had been raining on and off for a week, and the rains brought debris from the valley down through the stream and into the ocean. Brown water means sharks, and we stayed away. Once the tent was up and the fire blazing, the wind picked up. There were maybe 15 folks at other camping spots down along the shoreline. By 7 it was dark. By 9 we were in bed. I'm not a camper, and I truly believe the best part of camping is waking up alive. But in Hawaii I'll camp, maybe because it's home, maybe because it's always warm. The sound of the ocean soothes me, and the smell, salt and rain and trees, makes me feel safe. But here's the thing. Hawaii is the single most isolated landmass on Earth, and the spots we seek out for our summer backpacking trips are the remotest spots in an already remote place. The Big Island of Hawaii is the youngest island in the Hawaiian chain and is still being both formed and destroyed. The land feels different here. It is where my mother was born, where she took me to heal before my own babies came. It is the place my son is named after, where my grandmother is buried, and where her oldest son disappeared. Halemaumau crater is the home to Pele, the volcano goddess, who can appear in different forms. And there are roads on the Big Island people avoid driving out of fear of seeing a white dog or a young woman in white floating who waits to be picked up. People say the woman who steps in the car is not the same as the woman who's there at the end of the ride, that it is somewhere just past the burial cliffs at Honoka'a, where she transforms from a young woman to an old woman, skin gnarled and withered, who leaves behind an ohia lehua blossom or strands of hina hina.
That was fantastic. You guys are welcome to ask the questions.
I'm happy to actually.
Yeah.
So what house was that in, by the way? Was that
Yeah.
I believe they still live there.
Yeah, we still live there.
It's been remodeled.
Yeah.
But that didn't do
Fine.
anything.
It's fine. Okay, so nothing since really, nothing to that extent
Oh,
that
no.
you've heard.
Well, no, it has been remodeled, but occasionally, I do not like staying in the house by myself. And I was reading that line about I slept with the lights on. Max sleeps with the lights on. I think I know. I think there's something about that house, and it's not as bad as it was when we moved in, but there are occasional moments, and there are particular spots. And I think the spots that are the particular ones are the old spots, like the laundry room. There's a chimney that's kind of in the middle of the house right before Max's room. That's a particularly.
What do you think's doing it?
I don't know. I don't know if there's something doing it, or if I am so afraid of things that I've decided there's something doing it. But it's an old house. I mean, it's a 100-year-old house, and there has to be something in there. I just think mathematically there has to be something, and so.
Yeah, something.
And those people, I mean, those people who lived there before us and the people who lived there before them, if there's not something, why isn't there something? Maybe.
Right. Well, I think that the second half of the essay will get, and it gets into some more crazy shit, as I said. So in Hawaii, it has sort of been your experience, and so as we talk about, maybe that idea of like how you, I don't know, how you tap into these experiences, these entities, these forces as a human personally. I think we'll get into that in the second half because there's some stuff that can build upon what's happened at the Boise house. But I think it's really interesting in the structure of the essay. You don't really go back to Boise. There's that one section of the essay, and I think me not being, Hawaiian and living in Hawaii, and I can tap into what you bring in the Hawaiian sense, but the Boise stuff, I was like, yeah, that's a house around the corner, right?
That's what I'm saying.
So, but so really well described too. It's beautiful and just like so vivid. Other questions about Malia's stuff from your end? You don't have to. That's okay. But it's
Any more?
No.
Thanks for playing along with her. Too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
Great.
music was
But,
perfect.
I was gonna ask where your house was located, but not anymore. I'm like,
Yeah.
don't do it to
Don't,
myself.
it'll keep you up at night. Yeah.
Have you smudged the house?
We've done everything. I had a friend who came over, she smudged the house, she burned her sage. My mother sprinkled Hawaiian salt in the corners. I also feel like, what if I'm holding on to the idea of the house being really interesting? Because it makes me feel more interesting, you know? I mean, whatever.
But that's why we're writers, I think, or,
Yeah.
you know, or musicians, they're telling these stories to kind of, I think, kind of intrinsically be more interesting to ourselves and others, hopefully,
Yeah.
but there is an instinct, but yeah.
But Josh, he told me once, because Josh is on these haunted trips with me, and he navigates Hawaii differently than I do. He's a white guy from Missouri, and so the way that I navigate Hawaii as an indigenous Native Hawaiian woman who grew up with these stories and believes in these myths and these legends, Josh comes to the same places that I go, and he doesn't experience it in the way that I do, but he's not deeply connected to that land or that place in the way I am. But there was another spooky moment we had, and Josh said that life that you live in your imagination is so much easier to navigate than the real world. And I think especially now that seems to be the case. Life in my imagination is easier to navigate than the real world. And so I stay there sometimes, and wherever I go, there's something about the land and that space and the connection that I feel to my ancestors. And when we go hiking, I feel like I'm carrying on this conversation with them, which I think just translates into narrative and story, because I'm a writer and that's what makes sense to me.
That's cool. We can get into a bit more of that conversation in the second half after you read the second half of your essay, but I thought maybe to go into halftime, would you guys be interested in playing a song?
Sure.
Something, you know, something spooky, something creepy. I was just at the Idaho Horror Film Festival, and they were in the Egyptian theater, like, trying to take
That's a good
readings,
spooky
yeah,
place.
so, but alright. So what do we have?
This song's called Get Away. This one's also on the EP. Danny looks ready.
Oh, I'm always ready.
And it creeps in the night when I'm all alone. Comes through the walls in my head. Makes me feel like I wanna be dead. When I'm sitting there staring at the wall, you know I wonder what my life's all about. 'Cause I've seen the backside, 25, and I haven't found out about love, about money, about all the silly things, games we play. We're all the same. I had it all and it burned away, and you know that's why I had to get away. I couldn't stay, oh, couldn't stay. We all end up in the same place. I get there first and light the way, and you know that I had to get away. Couldn't stay, oh, couldn't stay. We all end up in the same place. I get there first and light the way. And a confessional inside a church pew, disguised all got demons on our mind all the time, and we're all alike. And you know that's why I had to get away. I couldn't stay, oh, couldn't stay. We all end up in the same place. I get there first and light the way. And you know that I had to get away. Couldn't stay, oh, couldn't stay. We all end up in the same place. I get there first and light the way. And you know that I had to get away. Couldn't stay, oh, I couldn't stay. We all end up in the same place. I get there first and light the way. And you know that I had to get away. Couldn't stay, oh, I couldn't stay. We all end up in the same place. I get there first and light the way.
Trees. All right, so I think that's our first half. So yeah, we'll come back with some more essay and discussion and some more music and process and round up the last hour. But there is food, drink, bathroom all the way down the hall, like Wayne said, and yeah, buy a raffle ticket. Win that car. I saw it parked out front sometime. I was like, over here. It's pretty fancy. So, anyway, yeah, just take a break. We'll open this up and then reconvene. We'll herd everybody back in here just about 8 o'clock or just right after. Okay. I mean, excuse me, 7 o'clock. Just after. So, yeah. All right. Nice to have you guys.
Thanks.
You guys sound so.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. It was a perfect segue song too. After
Actually,
the-
yeah,
I was like,
yeah,
this is a good call. This song.
Thanks for following me on the air there, where I gave you another.
Even busy.
I gave us like a third. You guys can play a little bit.
Man, that song was so appropriate for what just happened.
I know, that's why I was.
Creeps in the night when we're all alone. Comes through the walls. That's good.
It's in the air.
Tell you what, camping is beautiful too because it's so easy.
And creeps in the night when I'm all over.
Right, like something that's
Comes
just
through
the
the
layout.
walls in my head. Makes me feel like I'm when I'm sitting there staring at the wall, I wonder
We went
what
camping
my life's all
this
about.
year.
Because it's in the backside of 25.
And first time we slept in
About love, about money, about all the silly things and games we play. We're all the same. I had it all.
so just like the temperature and the fact that you just you just swimsuit and just t-shirt and you're good to go.
We haven't ever met.
And
I
the
got
second
to,
verse is
they
kind of
advised
like,
us, because I did Rim to Rim in the canyon, the Grand Canyon this summer, the Ranger
second verse is kind of like
but it was so
experience with this church. I found a confessional inside a church. You're like confessing their sins as a joke, so it's just somebody writing out their thoughts. But it's like water because every like your thoughts.
Hey, I'm Wayne.
Hey Cameron,
Cameron, nice to meet you.
nice to meet you.
Yeah, that sounded good, you guys. You met Dan, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Good stuff.
Thank you very much.
Fits the space really nicely.
Yeah, and it's
Especially before
great
Halloween.
for-
you want me to face the camera so I get her here,
Mm-hmm.
and then that door, like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
And if it needs to be like zoomed in to like get like minimal this door, just like how zoomed in you were was really solid. Just it was just like slightly off the center, that third. So if you just like a tiny bit that way, it would have been really solid. Like it would have been perfect. And then when they're playing, now that's a difficult one. You found the sweet spot one time, and I was like,
what was it?
I don't even remember. But like it was where we were partially. Him sitting up there makes it difficult, but it was where he was partially in. You were getting, this guy was facing a little bit further this way, so you could get better his face, and then you had this guy.
Yeah.
So it was like a
And that's
combination of
more
those things.
Yeah.
And in fact, we might be able to just fix that via put on this chair just a little bit. That way he's like forced to face that way a little more.
Let's see if that works.
Yeah. And that should.
Okay. I try to continue to do it.
No, yeah, you're doing great. You're doing great.
And the fiddle player have such a good thing, and
yeah,
I'm starting.
Yeah. Especially on those close-ups, that was really good.
I wish I knew the music or that, because then I know. Okay, you're about over with. I can look.
Right.
The people she's talking to are right here.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to. I tried one time to get C, and
You're
can't.
good. You're good.
So
you're good.
But yeah, I just want direction.
When you're getting the. So like. When you should get them is when like if you see like they're really zoned in, try and like maybe like get them like a little bit, or if it's at the end, just sort of just see if you can swing, because I have that camera to get a different shot, so see if you can swing that. But yeah,
Alright,
other than that, it's
continue
perfect.
Continue to try.
You're crushing it. You're crushing it.
I get a raise.
going by and stuff, you know, it's kind of crazy to try and play a lead, you know, so it's a little battery powered thing that I'll definitely be bringing.
So there's 3 of you?
Yeah. And the double bass.
Yeah. Nice and full. We're trying to work out Elin and stuff because she's coming to December. So there's the set bass and like these guys. Now there's oh, Jonathan and his bass player. Right. But it's those two. Right. Nothing's gonna get more professional than this for these guys are all like flaming here.
Have they done theirs?
They did last season. They did this second one, I think. So, yeah, and it was so good. I mean, from like conversation standpoint, I think Amber's in most. Yeah, she's the next one. Yeah, she was
Oh, next time.
yeah, she's the one. Yeah. Good stuff.
Yeah, it is. Nice. The electric Fiat's got a market. I was just outside, I took a lap around the block, but why on a Sunday? So it looks like to me, I didn't go, there's a white envelope, the little pink, smaller piece of paper sticking out.
Maybe it's been there since yesterday. I know much of its whereabouts, so well, I do actually. It's over being usually charged up the night of the I'll talk to management. Pass the buck. Guys get a beer or drink or anything.
The water's holding up fine.
Good. Probably in a minute, yeah, like 2 or 3 minutes.
Pixie's talking about stuff. The most defiant things you can do is go out and drink with your buddies and drive on this one highway that you're never supposed to drive on at night. Nice red Radio Boise t-shirt with the black collars. And what do you think, Diana? You know, I back in.
Yep.
Young Babu.
How are you? You like that?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, it was really cool.
The wrestler.
Fat.
Did you just say one item?
I had to come back inside.
Are we gonna sit in the high chair?
When we get started, you can move this next to your guitar stand.
We're gonna go high chair.
So
People
it's
can't see.
Yeah.
Will you hurry up and get taller?
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
That's fine. Peter's here.
Yeah.
Oops, sorry.
I'm shaking up my ears.
Wayne. Wayne. It's okay. It's okay.
Is it okay? It's more than okay.
Thank you. Okay.
It's fun.
Communication, folks. Communication.
They can do the back, Joe. I think Kelly's coming.
Yeah.
That's our song for that way. So, alright, we're getting ready for the second half of our programming here. And, we'll wait for Kelly to kind of ease into it a touch. But maybe talk about your project a little bit, Malia, before you get into the second half, because you're working on a new piece for
Yeah,
the Scary
so Scary
Fort,
Fort.
actually. It's a, this is why we were, so the impetus for a new possible collection of essays, right? Or
Yeah, although I think, am I gonna be a one-trick pony? Like, here's another scary story about a hike that I took. And so I write about Hawaii because I live in Idaho, and you were talking about the song, Cam, that you wrote when you were feeling really homesick, and I feel like I do that when I'm writing. It's a way to find my way back to this place. And so right now I'm working on a story for Scary Fort, but it navigates it, so it's spooky in a different way, and it navigates fear and relationships and love. And I also like bringing in the historical things about Hawaii, because I think the history of that place is fascinating, and so much of the history informs these places. And so there is a hike that we did, just a day hike, we did last summer, and Max, who's like gonna be totally traumatized after tonight, was Max and I were hiking together, and do you remember, Max? It was up off of Tantalus Drive in the Nu'uanu Valley, which is where Kamehameha I conquered the Hawaiian Islands, and it's a boneyard. I mean, there are thousands and thousands of people who died in the Battle of Nu'uanu. And so we were hiking back there, and Max, we were kind of halfway through, and Max said, "This is the most haunted hike we've been on." And I was telling my mother this story. She said, "Malia, that's when you turn around and you leave." And I said, "Oh, but Max, we're almost at the end. It's so awesome. We gotta go to see the view." So we got up to the top, and I said, "On the way down, point out the spot to me where you felt it." And he said he could feel it in his chest. And we were hiking down, and it was this tree coming out, and Max said, "This is the spot. I feel it. I can feel it in my chest." And as he said it, I felt on my wrist just these 2 taps. And I was like, "Run!" And then we hustled out of there.
It was raining. It was raining, and it was a clear trail, and it was considerably haunted. So like,
Yeah, it was. That was a scary one. But
that's the new essay.
Yeah, so that's that's a moment in the new essay, but it also brings in some historical things about two other places. And so it's about, and a lot of it is about being in a place where you don't necessarily belong, either for a short time or a longer amount of time. So that's what the next one's
Well, let's
about.
read the last half of this, and then we'll get on to some more music too.
So this is the last
There's a lot
part.
of
You guys ready? In the winter of 2016, the Department of Land and Natural Resources shut down both the hike to Waimanu Valley and the campgrounds after 2 residents in Waipio tested positive for dengue fever. Even though it had been over a year since any new cases of dengue were reported, and the trail and campsite were deemed safe, people were still hesitant about visiting the valley, and the hiking permits, usually hard to get, weren't. Half of the campsites were empty. Since there were so few people camping along the beach, it was easy to make out the headlamps of those who passed by our tent to get water from the stream. The closest tent and campfire were about 100 yards down the beach. The waves were calm that night, and I fell asleep almost immediately. I don't know what time it was when I woke up and saw the flicker of orange flame on the side of the tent, or what time it was when I peeked through the tent flap and saw the line of torches marching down the same path we'd taken to get to Waimanu. I couldn't feel my feet, and at the end of my sleeping bag, what looked like a very small boy was sitting on them. Fear is a felt sense. My body felt like it was pushing itself together, trying to make itself smaller. I blinked once, then twice. The little boy was gone. I could hear my Auntie Betty's voice like she was right there with me. "Babe," she whispered, "when you hear the night marchers, keep quiet. Don't let them see you. Put your head down. Pretend you're not there. Even better," she said, "pretend you're dead." I closed my eyes and lay with my face against the ground. In the distance, a conch shell sounded, and then the rumble of drums. The beats were low and rhythmic, bum bum, bum bum. And then they grew louder and louder, and what sounded like the swish of feather capes grazed the outside of the tent, and the drums still, bum bum, bum bum. The drag and shuffle of feet passed by the tent. Some paused, then kept going. I was breathing harder now and trying to count a minute in my head, then 2, then 3. The last footsteps were the lightest, the children. When the sounds of shuffling stopped and the drums grew quiet, I lifted my head slightly, turned, and peeked outside. The long line of torches split apart at the end of the beach, and half walked out to sea, the other half up the mountain, and the flames from their torches turned into a gray mist that disappeared into the night sky. I thought of the little boy I saw at the edge of my sleeping mat and wondered if his appearance there was a warning or a sign. The next morning when I woke, I found 2 red tea leaves, a sign of royalty, pointed at the opening to our tent. I stepped around them and looked up the cliffs and down the beach. Even with the sounds of all those feet dragging across the sand, there were no footsteps or signs that anyone had walked past. It looked untouched, possibly even smoother than it had the night before. It's a story I've never told anyone until just now. The waterfalls that ring Waimanu Valley fall from nearly 3,000 feet up. Wai'ilikahi Falls, the biggest waterfall I've ever been in, was an hour's hike from the campsite. Hawaiian superstition says to float a leaf on the surface of the pool before going swimming. If it floats and spins clockwise, you're safe. If it sinks or swirls counterclockwise, whatever lives below the surface is waiting to feed. I dropped a leaf down and it floated clockwise. We climbed in. After an hour, Josh got restless. "Let's look for the next one," he said. We gathered gathered our things to go, and once we got down the path toward the main trail leading back to camp, I saw a howe tree, and its roots formed a perfect bridge to cross over the stream to get to the other side of the valley. I climbed over the roots, crawling in spots, and Josh followed. When we got to the valley floor on the other side of the stream, the dense tangle of trees opened up and I could see a trail. I told Josh to follow me, and I led us deeper into the valley. After 10 minutes of walking, I stopped. I was not a good navigator when it came to unmarked trails, but this time was different. It was like I could see the path before I saw it, and walked from one spot to the next with no trail markers. I said to Josh, "I know this place. It feels like I've been here before." The skin on my neck started to tingle. I walked faster. The path kept opening itself up to me, and it was with laser precision that I got us to the second waterfall. Kakauki Falls, this one smaller and darker, the jungle thicker, the water the color of mud and tinged red around the edges. The waterfall into the first pool was small, and at the edge of the pool was a short scramble up a rock face to a fern grotto. Even though there was no light coming through the canopy of trees, the ferns in that grotto shimmered green and swayed like something underwater. Josh swam over first and climbed up the rocks. "This is unbelievable," he said. "Come here." But there was something keeping me from getting in the water. I slowly took off my hiking boots, but I still felt uneasy. I dropped a leaf in the water and it floated and swirled in the right direction. "You're being paranoid," I told myself. Josh called again. I slid in and swam to the other side. Once there, I climbed the rocks and looked up. At the back of the grotto was another waterfall, much bigger than the one below, and when the ferns blew back from the force of the water, I saw hidden behind the falls were two small caves carved into the rocks. I heard my mother's voice in my head. "Don't make trouble," she said. And then I felt it, something settling onto my shoulders, and then as if a hand was pushing me down, I fell. My feet and legs like they'd been shoved out from under me. I tried to get up, but I couldn't. It felt like something was holding me from under the water. "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm so sorry." Josh pulled me up. A figure 2, maybe 3 heads taller than me hovered over the water for a moment and then vanished. And what looked like a small red ball of light flew through the waterfall, lit up the inside of one of the caves behind it, just for a moment before flickering out. The air smelled like sulfur. I was crying then, my heart racing. "We're not wanted here," I said, and we both swam back to the other side as quickly as we could, climbed out in silence, packed up, and left. Since I knew the trail so well on the way in, I thought it would be an easy trip back to the first waterfall, and then to camp. But on the way back, nothing looked familiar. I didn't see the trail or the trees or the stream or rock piles we'd seen coming in. It was like I'd never been there. I steered us in one wrong direction and then another. Finally, Josh went ahead and led the way back. It took more than double the time to get back as it had taken us to get there. Hawaiians believe in the akulele, or flying gods, and their appearance can mean one of 2 things. Death is coming, or whomever died in that spot is warning you away. My mother says what led me from the first waterfall to the second was calling me to a place they didn't want me to leave. Like the voice that answered when I called Josh's name, it wanted to lead me astray, back through the trees and tall grass and rock paths that lined the valley floor, into the waterfall, and perhaps to the small caves just beneath it. Shortly after that hike, I developed a slight limp in my left leg, the same leg that hit the ground first, when whatever led me to Ka'akui Falls made their presence known. I think of the limp now as a reminder to stay out of places not meant for me. Legend says when you tell a story like this one, the spirits can hear you. They believe you're calling them back to you. This morning I woke up and on my left shoulder were 5 red scratch marks, like a hand grabbing me, warning me, but still I didn't listen. The music makes it scary.
Not really, I haven't read that. And it's creepy as well. It doesn't hint it for sure, but yeah, so
That was awesome.
yeah.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. There's a lot of questions I can ask you. But I want to point out that you actually write children's books too.
Yes! Welcome, children. I do. I should write some spooky children's books.
Yeah. Well, we won't go into that right now, but I do believe it for sure. I guess before we segue back into the band stuff, I would say fantastic stuff. But definitely as a sort of a white guy living in Idaho and whatever Washington, California in my life, and the way you portray the folklore and the Hawaii itself, just the physicality of the land is fantastic. And you've done that with your children's books, and it sounds like I know some of the fiction that I've read of yours does that as well. And so I was super curious. You said you don't want to be a one-trick pony, but maybe I guess like culturally, sort of if you keep going back to Hawaii as a place you want to write about, how do you keep diversifying, I guess, your storytelling voice?
That is a good question, and I've always liked telling spooky stories, but I never wrote a scary story before. And but I keep a journal and I write down all of these things that we do when we're traveling in Hawaii and on these adventures. And I think when I write, I think I definitely have a particular nonfiction voice that is very different from my voice in fiction. And I write about Hawaii in my fiction, but it's a place, but I also use it as a place to navigate big things. I'm really interested in families, and I'm interested in love, and I'm interested in relationships, and I'm interested in how things last and endure, and I use that juxtaposed against the natural world in Hawaii, which is constant but always changing. And I think the thing that I like about writing about Hawaii, and the reason that I like writing about love particularly, is Hawaii is so vulnerable. I mean, it's tiny, and there are things that happen all the time. Flash floods. They just had massive flooding when the Hurricane Lane was coming a month ago, and on my father's drive to work, there was a landslide, and so he couldn't go to work, and he had to turn around. And there's something about that place that also feels very precarious, that's interesting to me, because there are moments when relationships can feel precarious, and so that's what's interesting. So my fiction voice and my nonfiction voice are very different. What I like about nonfiction is that there are so many great ways to weave in place and history and story, and I write about my kids all the time, and so layering all of that stuff in, it feels, I'm always surprised when I bring in the historical stuff, and I keep thinking when I'm writing about details, and are these details in there because they sound cool, or do they actually move the narrative forward? And so that's something that I'm always having to remind myself of. Am I telling the story because it makes the reader turn the page and it leads the narrative forward, or am I telling it just because it sounds really fucking cool to describe these places? And so how do I not be a one-trick pony? I think that right now this is so compelling to me, and it feels, when I sit down to write, it feels immensely pleasurable, where sometimes when I sit down to write fiction, it's just like, ugh, again, I have to think about you again.
Well, I definitely think that that's like framing it as nonfiction, in which it has obviously a lot of fantastical elements that are like very much your
That's my
reality.
jam. That's my jam.
I think it works well. It draws me in a way that, I mean, a scary story in fiction can do that, or watch a scary film, but you know it's kind of like actually didn't happen. I'm like, this really fucking happened.
I know, that's what's
like what the ball of light.
That's what's so spooky about Hawaii. And the other night we're having dinner, my mother came over, and she is the best spooky story teller.
I know. Where's your mom tonight?
In the world.
We get to meet her.
And like the hair on your neck stands up. And she was telling scary stories the other night about events, and I thought, this is perfect timing. And there was a story that she was telling that I was writing about, but it turns out that we both remember it totally differently. And this person that was her neighbor, there was this event, but it's interesting hearing the way that she tells these stories, especially as she gets older, and I've sort of become the storyteller in this family. I listen to my mother tell stories, and I think this is why I tell stories. There's something so riveting about bringing this place and that person that you were at that particular time. That's fascinating to me, especially in creative nonfiction.
That's awesome. So, we'll switch over to you guys.
I have a question really quick.
Yeah, absolutely.
Would you say you're a risk taker?
No.
Really?
No.
A risk taker in what regard? Like physically and or like as a writer?
Physically and as a writer, but specifically it seemed like a theme in the last piece especially was taking risks or pushing the envelope. So I was just curious.
Like being spinning the right way, but you're going in, but you still know there's trouble out there.
Yeah.
So.
I never think of myself as a risk.
The way you ended the story too.
That's true.
Yes,
yeah,
and
in
still
fact, in your
tell it.
bio, you say, I think Malia Holmes loves to be really scared.
I do. I do. Maybe I am.
What do you guys think? Is she a risk taker? Maybe.
No problem. If you're living in that house, you probably are.
Maybe I am, and that makes me feel such a thrill, because I think I'm so cautious and so afraid of everything. But I mean, we do haunted hikes every day in Hawaii. We do these ocean swims, and there are shark sightings. So maybe I am a risk taker in Hawaii, and then when I get back to my Idaho life, I kind of take a break from
You hang the
that.
Superman cape up.
Yeah, and then I just get back to my professor life and my mother life and my writer life. But I've never thought of myself that way. But when you look, like if I heard of someone else doing the things I would do, I would think, that's badass. I don't know. I think that's cool to think about.
Alright.
You just changed my life. So thankful for that.
It does.
Yes.
Well, cool. Let's, I guess, hear about your new project. 16 songs? Sounds like a lot in a cool way for an album, right? That's what I read on your website.
Yeah, that's that was every song that we had at
Yeah.
the time, and
So you're putting it out, or is it out already?
we're working on it right now.
Cool.
Got a lot of them done. We're hoping to have it out by the end of November is what we're shooting for, but
Nice.
it all depends on how fast that guy that's mixing all our music gets done. That guy is unreliable. It's me.
But we actually recorded all the stuff in Reno, and it was a lot of it was a fun
Yeah.
experience.
So it was great.
Kind of bonding.
Yeah, the first road trip as a band.
Yeah.
Down to Reno.
Got the PBRs in the sink. Like,
I saw that picture actually. I remember that picture.
Danny, because Danny has like these old PVRs from like what 6 years ago.
Oh my gosh.
When was Vietnam War? I don't remember. So and then he was just like, hey, I brought these. They're really old. I'm just gonna put them in the sink. They're probably fine. You guys want one? And I'm like, great lead up story. Yeah, of course I do. And we didn't want one.
You realize too late that you don't want one.
Yeah,
more for me.
It's true.
Yeah. But you guys went down to Reno of all places to record.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
What's in Reno?
Some people.
To just some friends that
we
have
got
studios?
Sydney, sitting right there, she used to take guitar lessons from John, this guy that and he has a studio in the back of his guitar place, and her family's really good friends with him, and so he said if we picked a weekend and went down there, he'd give it to us for free, and they'll have a guy that'll, which ended up being her dad, who learned how to like record and do that stuff, and so we could do it for free, so we picked a weekend. And
so you recorded the entire album in one, like what you had?
Tour
in one
yeah,
weekend?
2 days.
That's pretty awesome.
Long 2 days. You were
Long, very long
I
2
imagine
days.
so, yeah.
Long, very sweaty.
Yeah, it was.
It's like muscle shoulder.
Very humid.
Yeah,
It's rough down there.
Cool.
I don't think we really mentioned it, but so our drummer Clinton had actually broken his foot too.
Oh jeez.
During that time, so he was like, I don't know if he was taping it up or what, but he had like a special shoe on, and then he'd play for a while, and he'd come out and curse a little bit and go back.
Put his soft cast back on and say, okay, I need to chill out for a sec.
Yeah, that's true.
That's awesome. That's the kind of stuff non-fiction writers can write about too. Like, you can write your own essays about all that. I'm sure some new songs also came out of that experience, but you might not have gotten to them yet. But maybe play us a couple off the album or whatever you'd like. Actually, a couple more.
Sure. Yeah. This next one's called Wild Ones.
Cool.
Gotta have to be the percussionist today too.
There you go.
Every time we have our side note, our piano guy is always like, Scott, you gotta move the cable up. Every single time we play, I'm like, thanks, Zach. He's not here today, so makes sense, right?
I'm all about blues, and if you've seen it, you come and tell, catch the wind beneath those shoes. Diney sing the same old song, bars of cats in the club, and don't get lost in the rising sun. Just look out for the wild ones. For the wild ones, for the wild ones, for the wild ones, for the wild ones.
Yep.
Did that place figure into your song, or?
Yeah, it did. So, don't get lost in the rising sun. Just look out for the wild ones. I noticed there was a lot of American, I guess, actors and things like that, songwriters that are still advertised quite a bit in Japan. When I was writing the line, writing the Tokyo train car lines, and you know, it was pretty much me. I was one day, my wife, she was going to Japan, or going to her Micron Japan office, and she left earlier that day, and she's like, go explore, and I'm just like, I don't read Japanese, and so I was like, okay, I'll try, and so just me taking the lines to it, and just don't get lost in the rising sun, just look out for the wild ones, and then I remember seeing like Asahi beer and like American guys there, and so it was just kind of interesting. It was just kind of writing about that situation. Yeah, and then more on the other parts of the lyrics and the verses were also about a lot of the older bands that I saw kind of romanticized over there as well too. So and a lot of guys that were inspirational to me as well. So a lot of the guys you don't hear about, you know, like
Cat Stevens, who else?
Cat Stevens, Donovan, you know, Bob Dylan. So I kind of incorporated those songs. Donnie's singing the same old song, Bob's and Cats and They Come. So yeah, that's kind of what it's about.
Did you have other? I know you have a list of questions.
Well, I was thinking about that in place because Cam, we were talking about writing when we're traveling, and you said you wrote the last song that you wrote when you were in Hawaii, right?
Yeah. The one we'll play at the end is the one I wrote in Hawaii.
Oh, yeah.
The first one, Elijah, I wrote when I was in China, because that's where I was really missing home. And then probably the next one we'll play is I wrote when I was in Iceland.
Before you almost died or after?
Oh yeah.
It was
before.
It was before, because then I really realized how much I didn't want to die in Iceland.
On the ice, actually.
Solo.
Well, there was this big mountain, and there's this glacier coming down next to it, and where you could drive up, it was really far away, but you could see way back there that the glacier eventually met up with the mountain. So I thought that I was just gonna traverse the side of it and then get to where they meet up, and then go out on the glacier and say, oh, I've been on a glacier. And then about halfway climbing around it, it started to rain really bad, and so it was washing out everywhere I was going, and then kind of lost the trail, because you could kind of see a trail going back, because like tour guides and stuff would take people back there, and there were a lot of signs that said, don't do this without a guide, and I was like, oh, I've been hiking before, I should be totally fine. But I got back, all safe.
So you are a risk taker, is what you're saying.
I guess.
It wasn't quite the haunted hike.
Yeah.
It wasn't a haunted hike, it just haunts my dreams now.
Yeah, that's
I have a weird fear of mountains now.
Did the actual experience influence the song that you wrote? Or was that perhaps?
Not really. The song was mostly written before. It was so when I went over there, we got a camper van, and we were gonna try to drive around the Highway 1, which is like the ring road, and try to do the whole thing, but we couldn't go north because it was like late in the season, and so there was like ice and stuff all over the road. So we went south, and we ended up pulling over in this little town, and we kind of like parked on the beach, and it was written just sitting in the camper van with the rain by the ocean, and it's kind of what I was seeing and feeling at the time.
Cool. Is that the song you guys gonna play now, or you have another one that you're gonna play?
No, we can play that now.
Yeah.
The one's called. It's called.
We're doing on time as well, so we're doing all right. So yeah, play that one.
This one's called When It Rains. that all my lovers have gone away. When it rains, I feel no pain. When it rains, I feel no pain. Standing next to giants, just waiting on the rain. I see the misty mountains, hear the seas call my name. Waiting on the black sand, I watch the tide draw near. The solemn silence makes me wish that I could die here. When it rains, I will feel no pain. 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 Reminders of times I never lived, and people I'll never meet, places I'll never go, and wonders I'll never see. All of us rest in a house made for two. Looking through the window, I see the trees dancing in the breeze. When it rains, I will feel no pain. When it rains, I will feel no pain. When it rains, I will feel no pain. When it rains, I will feel no pain.
That was not bad. Not bad at all. That was really great.
That wasn't
Oh my god. No, that was fantastic. Yeah, and that read kind of the setting, you know, so
Yeah.
laid out for us. That was awesome. And just in the interest of time, I would love for you guys now to perhaps do your what we do with the you haven't been here with the Couch Surfer series is do a writer collaborating with the musicians. We've already gotten a bit of that kind of the bonus tonight, which we haven't always had, is like all the way through. Malia's had some
We
accompaniment.
weren't supposed to do the last one.
No, you were.
Oh.
Yeah, you were supposed to do what you did. You actually didn't necessarily make the plans, but I thought that was perfect.
Oh, I thought it was.
Yeah, so.
I always want to be a
I know, you should have people that follow you around, like something about
My
marrying, or, you know,
soundtrack.
so you follow. So, they can just follow you around to your lectures. So play behind you. But a short piece, and then I'd love maybe a question or two from y'all out there after this, and then we can close it out. But, so tell us what this
So,
is.
it's lighter than what I read before. I think it's important to leave and go off into the night on a lighter note. And the summer after we graduated from college, Josh, you think when you graduate from college your life's going to be incredibly romantic, and the summer afterwards, it wasn't. Josh had a job doing maintenance at the state hospital, and I worked nights at a bakery making French pastries. And Josh would come home and tell stories about work, and he had this guy, always told these stories about him. And he came home and he said today, he said the best thing, what was his name? Daryl?
Yes.
Was it Daryl? And he said, Daryl said the best thing today where he was, he knew I was an English major, and he was talking about books, and he said, he looked at me and he said, reading, man, it's a love affair for you. And I thought, that's such a good, you never think of reading as this, passionate love affair, but it is, and so I wrote that in my notebook, and I finally used it. And so that was sort of, the impetus for the piece is how I feel like I'm in between places. And so that's where it started. And it's called It's a Love Affair. And it's navigating my Idaho life and my Hawaii life. It's a love affair. I tiptoe lightly around Idaho. I don't make very much noise. Maybe she won't notice I'm here. I follow trails up into the hills to try and find a way in, but her cold winter, her hard-packed dirt keep me out. They say, I won't let you get too deep. Idaho drifts from brown to gray to green to yellow and back. In Hawaii, I dive in, my mouth and my arms and my mouth wide open. See me, I cry, I'm back, I yell. I climb through Hawaii's peaks and valleys and memorize them onto my skin. The way the ancient Hawaiians saw the shadows of the lehua or naupaka branches and traced them, quilted their leaves into thick pieces of cloth. You're in between places, my friend Norma says. She's a Zen Buddhist priest, so she knows these things. She says, my wish for you is to have two places you call home. I pretend I don't hear her. My husband says, it's like you figured out a way to go to college on the mainland and go home to Hawaii for the summers, even though you're 47 and you're not in college. I remember someone saying once, the way I feel about reading, it's a love affair. The way I feel about Hawaii, it's a love affair. A really great love affair. New love, first love, the franticness of stolen kisses, of being pushed up against a wall and adored, of heat. Every time I go home, I can feel Hawaii twist itself inside of me and settle, first in skin, then breath, then bone. I start stories by saying, in my Hawaii life. In my Hawaii life, we join a hiking club where the median age is 50. Our first guide is Fred, who takes us through the ironwood trees and abandoned military bunkers in the hills above Pipeline Beach. He's in his late 70s, and his calves are like basketballs. His favorite moment in a hike, he says, is when you are near the summit and you have to scramble around a rock and you step from land to air and then back to land. In that moment, when one foot is touching the trail and the other is touching nothing but sky or cloud. I know that moment, I tell him. The way I straddle this life and the other one. One is earth, one is water. My Idaho life, with its dry hills and summer smoke skies, its recycle bins and homework and calendar invites and grocery carts, its alarm clocks and junk mail, all its dirty laundry. In Hawaii, I jump in the ocean every day, take off my beach dress and drop it on the sand. The water always warm and salty, and I swim as far as I can in one breath, roll over and look up, through the water, to the surface and then the sky. Blue, like in magazine photos, like what you've always wanted, but didn't know how to name it.
That's awesome. I know that on Radio Boise they've been airing or looking to air some of these like collaborative short pieces, so listen for that. So questions from any of you out there? Yes.
I guess for both sets of writers, like how do you know when something is finished? How do you, like what happens in your mind to let you know that a piece, a song or a story is finished?
I'll go first. I feel like if I end on a line